Hey, everybody, this is Kenny. Welcome back to the Leading from the Middle podcast. This is a podcast for middle managers who want to develop themselves, develop their teams, and improve their results. I got to talk to leadership coach, author, podcast host, and chief of staff, Emily Sander, joined me today, and Emily gave phenomenal advice. She is right in the middle as a chief of staff. And folks, for you that are in the middle, this is the podcast for you. And this particular show is really going to be targeted towards what you do. So listen to Emily's advice when it comes to communicating effectively, self-awareness, hiring and recruiting, decision making, and what the heck is the art of the Swizzle? Listen in to find out. You don't want to miss a second. Let's get at it.
This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. How do funded startup founders attract prospects and talent? Podcast interviews. How do entrepreneurs with exits find new deals? Podcast interviews. How do C-suite execs differentiate in crowded markets? Podcast interviews. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. Click the link in the show notes for a special offer. Celebrate good conversation.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. I have a great leader with me today who really, truly represents leading from the middle. And I can't wait to hear her story and how she's navigating that now in her current role. So I want to introduce leadership coach, author, chief of staff, Emily Sander has joined me today. Emily, it is so great to have you on. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Kenny. It's a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. When I saw chief of staff, I would have wanted to talk to you anyway without that, because you have a phenomenal background. But boy, oh boy, are you going to have some great advice, I think, for those that are leading from the middle. I really want to get your backstory first, though, and what led you to now do what you're doing today, which is helping so many others with their leadership, tasks, with their leadership, the advice that you're giving. What's the backstory for you, Emily?
Yeah, so I spent 15 years in the corporate world, and I started at large corporations like Microsoft and Amazon. So I was a tester on the testing team for the original Kindle device.
Oh,
So that's
wow.
my claim to fame there.
Yeah.
And then I worked for a series of small to medium technology-based businesses, and those were usually in like rapid growth environments. And so that's where I cut my teeth into leadership roles, and I primarily led client-facing teams like account management and customer support and customer success and those types of teams. And it culminated in a role as chief of staff, as you say, which was fantastic. And I loved that role for many reasons we can get into. But several years ago, I just kind of reflected back on what my favorite part of each role was. And it was the mentoring and advising and just helping people up their professional game. And so when I put that and coaching together, I said, oh, if I can wake up in the morning and do nothing but this, then I'll hit the jackpot. I'll have it made. So that's why I got into coaching.
Wow, that is awesome. That is awesome to just want to devote yourself to helping others every day. I love that. Let's get to chief of staff, because I've known some chief of staffs in my day, and I can remember them seeming to be stressed a lot because they always had to kind of please one side of folks, please another side, really squarely in the middle at an executive level, which has to be even tougher. So tell us a little bit about that role. What did you like about it? And what are some lessons that you would take away in terms of being right smack in the middle in a role like that?
Ooh, there's so much. I loved the influence that I could have through that role. And it's funny because I used to want to be a CEO. I used to want to have like the top spot, and working very closely and right next to many CEOs, I'm like, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm very comfortable, and I'm better at that number two spot where I'm kind of behind the scenes and the right-hand strategic partner to our CEO. So I love being able to really be influential, not only in my role directly, but through our CEO, through the other executives on the leadership team. And you don't get a lot of public credit for it all the time, but you can see how you impact someone or how you impacted a process and it being improved. So I love that part. And let me pause there. There were challenges and lots of other things, but that was what I loved most about it.
Yeah, and I would imagine so that I love that you said the word influence, because I would imagine in a role like that, influence plays a huge role, right? You can't tell the CEO what to do, or other folks, other VPs and stuff like that. So the influence I think was big. Yeah, let's get into the challenges, Emily. What was some of your biggest challenges, two or three of them, that you overcame every day?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, you're part of the executive team, and executives are one, extremely busy. So they don't have time to sit down with you and kind of think through things all the time. So you have to move pretty quickly and be proactive. So stay ahead of things, think 2 or 3 steps ahead, and even know somebody better than they know themselves. So it's like, hey, I have my CFO going into a meeting with the board. I know she's going to need X, Y, and Z. So she might not remember that or not think of it, but I know she needs that. And so I'm going to get ahead of it and do that. The other challenge, but I loved it, is information flow.
Mm-hmm.
So information flow throughout the org, and you can think about that in so many different directions. So up the chain, right, from the rank and file, quote unquote, rank and file people to leadership, because the people who are on the front lines of a call center speaking to customers directly every day know what's going on with their customer base in a different way than the CEO, just by the nature of their jobs. So making sure that information flows up, which by the way goes through the management level. The other direction is quote unquote down, and I'm trying not to be pejorative about these directions, but from the leadership team down to the rest of the organization. I often found there was a lot of daylight in between a strategic decision that's made up here and then its actual communication and implementation to the rest of the organization. So a lot gets lost through telephone game. So that was another challenge. And the third one I'll mention is you're working with very high level people and have done well for themselves. So you're usually dealing with some big personalities and some healthy egos, and you have to kind of navigate those different personalities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Wow. I want to ask this, and you gave a lot of it already as you talked about your challenges. If I'm that store manager, I'm running a very successful, let's say, retail store, very busy. I've got customers and I've got my staff, my team, right? And I've got a district manager to probably report to, then directors and on up. Within those, you really mentioned that information flow. At that level, what would be a couple of other pieces of advice you would give them to really navigate that whole world in the middle while still being successful?
Yeah, I mean, information flow, I always say, is it relevant and is it
Wow.
helpful?
Yes.
So is
Yes.
it relevant and helpful? And you're kind of the buffer or the filter. So if you're, at a store and you have connections with the district or national level or what have you, and you are privy to information that the rest of your team isn't, okay, great. You're not like a sieve where the information goes through 100%. You've got to use your brain and say, okay, what information would be relevant to my team and what would help them? And I have lots of scenarios where it's like, oh, I know something might be happening, but I'm not sure yet. And it would just worry people. And
Yeah.
so like it wouldn't be helpful for them to know about that until it becomes more official. So there's things like that where, okay, is it helpful? Or, oh, I know this is coming. There's a big change that's coming. I don't know the exact details, but I want to start to get people used to the idea. Maybe open that conversation up just so people can get on board. So things like that. And then things going up the chain. So you are an advocate for your store and your team. So are you a good ambassador for what your people are hearing up the chain?
Yeah. What great, great advice. And everything you said there really struck me. But one, I was thinking back to my days as a district manager, and I can remember a few times getting calls from the VP who just bypassed everybody, right? Bypassed the director, bypassed the district manager, and called me up directly. Kenny, tell me what's going on.
Mhm.
And I'm sure back then I probably gave way too much information because you're so nervous. You pick up the phone, hello. Um, But you said something so dead on, you really have to guard that information sometimes. That doesn't mean you're not open, but if you think something is happening, why, unless you know why really concern, someone else with it, especially at an executive level like that. I think that is spot on advice from you. Thank you so much. I want to get into some of the skills that you really help others with. I'm going to just fire them off here and get your advice. You are really big on, and you touched on it, on communicating effectively. And you also tie that in with having a great self-awareness. I know, emotional intelligence has kind of been a big buzzword, two words, for the last 10 years or so, but tie those in together for us and give those leaders out there that are listening some advice on how they can communicate effectively today and how that ties in with them having just a lot more self-awareness.
If you're running fast throughout your day, every conversation you have and every interaction you have, know that you have a bias. So right now today, listening to this, you have a communication bias. You have a way you like to receive information, and you have a way you like to convey information to others. Then understand that there are 7 billion people in the world, and not everyone likes to communicate like you do. And so you've got to figure out, okay, know yourself. That's where the self-awareness piece comes in. And then the emotional intelligence piece comes where, like, okay, how does Kenny like to receive information? Or, oh, I know Emily is a little bit, she likes to get used to things and she needs things a little bit more nuanced. And like Jackson over here loves it short and sweet, like to the point. And understand that you as a manager might have to flex your communication style to the person you're talking to. So that's one of the biggest overarching themes. And then there's just little things that I always say, like, if you have the opportunity to put something in the form of a question versus a order, then go that route. And it could be a case where and the other person knows they're going to do it because you're the boss and you're not really asking them, but even just putting it in a question phrase helps it land better with that other person and helps them receive it better and make them more likely to do it. So it could be, to give an example, it could be like, hey, would it be a good idea if we put the 3 slide decks together to make a new one for next week's all company meeting? And that's very different than, Kenny, put the 3 slide decks together and have it up by my desk end of day. We need that for next week's meeting. Those two things sound very different. They might get to the same outcome, but they land a lot differently with the listener.
Wow. That's some great advice. Emily, how do you get to know, and especially, let's say, in the role that you've had, as chief of staff, how do you get to know how different people like to be communicated? And then how do you bridge that gap and kind of walk that fine line?
The first piece is just observe. So you've got to be paying attention. It's not just let me zoom through my day. You might be moving fast, but it's also collecting data points along the way. Even if it's a quick Slack exchange, or even if it's a quick aside with Maria over here, or hey, Steve over here wanted to come and talk to me. So be observant. Sometimes if you're moving really fast, it's saying, okay, at the end of my day or week, just have a think, maybe write stuff down, or just mentally go through things like, hey, what did I learn about my team? What did I learn about people's communication style? So observe and pay attention. The second way, which is funny that a lot of people miss, is ask them. So ask the other person, like, hey, like, how do you like to receive information? Or, hey, if I have some company news or a new procedure or policy, what's the best way? People have, some people are better in the morning. Some people like one-on-one. Some people like group brainstorm. Some people like you to ask the question, give them a day or 2 or 3 to have them think about it, and then they'll come back to you. So just asking them, like, hey, like, here's an example. I just want to make sure I'm asking this in the best way, or getting this information over to you. What's your preference if there was one?
Wow. That's great advice. And I suppose also in there is just slowing down a little bit, because you mentioned how, the fast pace and, in the retail restaurant world, I mean, I think every place is fast paced these days, but especially there where everything is coming so quickly at them. That's great advice, and I especially like that because we don't really think to say, "Let me just ask this person," "Do
Yeah.
what you wanna communicate by email or, do you want me to send you a deck?" What I love that. I love that. Um, I saw something today, Emily, and I wanna shift over a little bit to hiring and recruiting because you've helped a lot of companies, really fine-tune how they hire. I saw something today that bothered me, but this is, again, a personal preference for me that there are CEOs that offer a cup of coffee to
Mhm.
someone and, whether they actually put it back or empty it out or throw it in the garbage or leave it on the desk, they use that as a reason to hire or not to hire, and I'm like, "Come on, man," I don't know, that's
Yeah.
just me, I'm like, "Come on," I get it, you wanna see if they're thorough or whatever, but come on, so much more to a person, than that, in my opinion. Um, what are some things that you have been teaching these days on hiring and keeping top talent?
Yeah, so that's a big question. The few things I'd start with are in the interview process, again, set it up to collect data points. So the coffee, for instance, is one data point, but it should be
Yes,
one among many.
yes,
So you get
absolutely.
a full picture. And then I would say like every single touch point you have with the candidate counts for something. And that goes both ways, by the way. So, like everything that they're doing, you can evaluate them on, and everything you do, they're going to judge you on how you interact with them. So, just know that it's a two-way street.
Right,
But I set
absolutely.
up processes where, I want to see how you are with planned emails. I want to see how you are with impromptu voice calls. I want to see how you are when I'm super nice, or maybe when I'm a little bit more direct or upfront. If you're in a client-facing role, not everything is going to be rosy all the time. So what do you do when things get a little bit tense and heated? So I put those in there. But depending on what the role is, I just have a process where I get as many data points as I can from that person. And the second piece to that is I usually keep in mind these two buckets. So with any candidate, you're going to have information coming in that either falls in the aptitude or attitude bucket. So
Mm,
aptitude
mm,
is the hard skills someone needs to be in the job. So if they're like working for accounting, they might need accounting skills. If they're working as a waiter, they might need to be able to understand the menu and be able to rattle that off. Whatever it is, there's the aptitude piece. Then there is the attitude bucket. And that's equally, if not more important than the aptitude bucket. And that's, what is your attitude toward the team? Are you proactive? Are you a good team member? Are you good to be around? Or is it like, oh, okay, Emily's like really good at her job. She has the aptitude, but I hate interacting with her. I hate when I have to go to her for something. I dread it.
mm.
So look for the aptitude bucket and the attitude buckets.
Yeah, I love that, and so you're really saying it's a big picture to really look at, and I love that, you killed right away the whole coffee thing because, yeah, maybe that's one piece, and that's not what I read in the article, that it wasn't one piece, that it was like a deal breaker at times, but that could be one piece, and I think that's great. Um, are are employers these days, or what's your advice on if someone's resume, because you said you're looking at every point of contact, does it start with the resume these days, or is that still as important as it was, say, 10 years ago?
I think it starts with the resume because that's kind of the snapshot or like the trailer. I think of it as like a movie trailer for the feature film.
I
So
love
the job of
it.
the resume is to get that first interview, and that's its only job. So when people send me like 5-page resumes, I'm like, I appreciate that, but I don't need your life story yet. So
Yeah.
just give me like the taster test or the teaser trailer and give me enough information to see if you're in the ballpark of wanting to get an interview with you. So yeah, data points all across the board. I've had discussions with colleagues on cover letters. I say like you don't need them. One of my colleagues is like, I will not interview someone without a cover letter. And so I'm like, okay,
Really?
that's a difference. So
Yeah.
you got to pay attention, but um, make sure your resume is quick and easy for someone to read.
Yeah.
So if you've got a hiring manager or a recruiter going through dozens or hundreds of resumes, you've got to make it easy for them to read, and that's in both content. So like make it easy for them to pick up what you've done, and also format. So like 8-point font and like a grayscale is not going to be great. You want it like bold and hopefully big font so people can just skim through that. Like, yep, I want to talk to her. Yep, I want to talk to him.
That's great advice. Wow. Leaders, y'all better be listening to this, man. That's some great advice. Um, if I have big gaps in my resume these days, or vice versa, if I've jumped from job to job, that used to be a big deal. Is it still a big deal, Emily? Is that something that employers still look at, or what's your advice on there?
I think it matters. How much it matters depends on the hiring manager and also how many times you've jumped and how quickly and what the reason for it was. So if I have clients who are like, hey, I've had a series of jobs in a relatively short time frame, I often say try to put a little explanation for why you left that job in the resume. It's like just a one
Oh,
liner.
wow.
So, hey,
Okay.
like got laid off because of COVID, or hey, took a sabbatical to take care of family, or hey, I was going back to school for this other piece and I finished, and so I got a role in this other field. Just some explanation for why the jumps happen, because then a hiring manager will go, oh, okay, like that makes sense now. I understand, no problem.
Wow. And that I had never heard that one before. I think that's spectacular advice to actually put a very brief explanation in the resume. Wow. Okay. That is awesome. And so I'm glad that it's a case by case basis then, right? Um, my last question on hiring and recruiting, this has been amazing, by the way, is you talked about attitude and aptitude. I think that's putting it perfectly. Um, if the attitude overwhelms the experience, right? If there's no experience, do you find employers are taking chances on folks that don't have or have very little experience these days?
Not as much as they should, in my opinion.
Mm.
So I am all for if you have someone with like a 10 on attitude, like trainable, teachable, eager, smart, can pick things up, and they're really low on the aptitude, I just lean in that direction. I have a heavy bias towards that. A lot of people are like, no, 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 no. I want to see that you have demonstrable experience in this
Right,
area.
right.
So it
Okay.
just depends. I would say, if you've got a go-getter, if you've got someone who can put things together and has the unteachable qualities, get them on your team. Bring
Mm,
them in the door, get them on your team, and train them up on the other skills that they would need.
mm.
So that's my bias. It depends. The one caveat I would say is if you're like hiring a surgeon, make sure they have like the aptitude skills. Like they don't need an attitude, they need to know how to do surgery. So just
No
depends on
doubt.
the role, but in general, I'd say get the people with the great attitudes.
No doubt. I'm 100% with you. I honestly at times prefer the attitude, if that, and you know what, I don't care about your experience now. We're gonna train you. So but I love how you said you got to balance that out. Um, I want to jump to decision making, and obviously that ties in a little bit with recruiting, right? Because you have to make a hiring decision at some point. Um, where do you see leaders today? What are some things that leaders are lacking? I'll ask you it that way when it comes to really having a process for making sound decisions these days.
The first thing is, again, self awareness. So, knowing what type of decision maker you are by default. And if you think, just for example, there's a spectrum. So, let's say on one end is I fire from the hip and I make emotional decisions. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? So, it's
Mm,
kind of like instead of ready, aim, fire, it's fire, aim, why weren't you ready? And you're looking around and you're ahead of everyone else. So, that's one end of the spectrum.
mm,
On the other end of the spectrum are people who are deliberate and careful and calculating and like to do a spreadsheet and then color code the spreadsheet and then ask 12 people and then think about it some more. So they're stuck in that kind of
yeah.
analysis paralysis. And so know which one you tend to gravitate toward. And again, here you can ask for feedback, you can take assessments, you can do all these things, and then say, okay, knowing that about myself, what does this decision call for? Is this a decision that's irreversible and has serious ramifications if I get it wrong? In that case, you might want to slide over to the deliberate part and maybe ask for people's opinions if you have time. If this is like, hey, I need to move, like I need to move now, and I need to be a little bit uncomfortable with how fast I'm going because that's what the situation calls for, you got to slide yourself over. So the first step is be self-aware about how you typically make decisions.
Wow. That's such great advice because I think we see, I'll talk about my experience. I've seen so many spontaneous decision makers, right? That just fly off the hip, and just make a decision. Well, why'd you do that? I mean, what was the information that you had? How long did it take you to make that decision? Um, but then there's also the ones that wait way too long, and then the moment passes, right? So I think that is phenomenal advice. Okay, I got to ask you this now, and we're winding down. This has been amazing. I love to do a lot of research. Whoever I'm going to talk to, you can probably tell that. But every once in a while, I'll come across something. I said, you know what? I want to hear it firsthand. I'm not going to even dig into that and see what it is. So with you, it's the art of swizzle.
Ah, yes.
I got to know what that is. So talk to us about that, Emily.
Yeah, so swizzle is a made up word. So I blurted it out one day because I was moving fast and I told my team, hey, we got to swizzle this together. And what it means is taking the best pieces of different things and making a new and relevant one. So let me give you an example. So as an example of swizzling, it's a way to be creatively resourceful. So
Yes.
I was in the car and I was listening to a podcast and they were interviewing Floyd Mayweather, who's a champion boxer.
Yes.
I don't know anything about boxing. You don't want to see me box, but they were interviewing Floyd Mayweather. And the interviewers were like trying to get him to tell, like, why are you so good? Like, what sets you apart? Is it your footwork? Is it your training? Like, what do you eat for your diet? And eventually, Floyd Mayweather said, it's none of those things. It's my adaptability.
Hmm.
I can adapt to any opponent, any round, and any punch better than anyone. And that's what makes me the champion.
Hmm.
And I was driving and I was like, oh my gosh, like light bulb moment, like, holy cow,
Yeah.
I'm not a boxer, but I can apply that to my world, which is business and people and leadership, and say, am I being adaptable? Is our team adaptable enough to the market, to a client, to each other? And so I was able to swizzle that concept from the sports world to the business world. So the art of the swizzle is just being open-minded and saying, okay, what lessons and learnings can I pull and tease out from these different areas that might be helpful over here? And once you like literally, because you've heard this, you will see these pop up in your day to day. So being resourceful and being able to lift and shift different concepts is what that's about.
Oh, that is awesome. There are things popping up in my head right now as you were saying that. That is awesome, and I'm not a huge boxing fan as I used to be when I was growing up, but Mayweather, yeah, I'm not surprised that he said that, and that can definitely apply to anything business wise, right?
Yeah.
Just that ability to be able to adapt. He was a master at that. He really was. Um, Emily, this has been amazing, and I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing. We need you. When I say we, everybody, we need you because you really bring it. You've got some very innovative stuff, but you bring stuff that leaders should be doing right back to the center, and I really love that. So, my last question for you is: how can people get in touch with you and be able to work with you? And I know you're an author. Is there a book that you have coming out, or one that you'd like to talk about now?
Certainly. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. You're a great host, and I really appreciate the
Thank
energy
you.
and authenticity you bring. So thank you. If people would like to know more about me, they can go to my website, which is nextlevel.coach. So next level, all one word, .coach. And then, as you mentioned, yes, I have 2 books, which you can find on there and also on Amazon. But there's Hacking Executive Leadership, which talks about Swizzle and some aptitude and attitude buckets and some of those types of things. And then my most recent book is an insider's perspective on the chief of staff. So the role that I had, I wrote a book about what that is and how organizations can use that. So those are out there on my site and also on Amazon.
Wow. Well, those will be in the notes. So, but I gotta say, leaders, both those books sound amazing, but you should get that second one for sure. Middle managers, because she'll give you a lot more insight. We were only able to grab some. I'm sure the book gives a lot more insight. So I'm going to make sure I get mine. I'm going to get both of them, but that's the one that I'm going to be focusing on. Emily, thank you again. God bless your journey. Continued success for you, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Kenny.
My pleasure. Folks, we will leave it there. This has been Kenny and Emily. This has been the Leading from the Middle podcast. We'll talk to you real soon.